welcome back to the Spirit of Prophecy podcast. Appreciate you joining me today as I dive into a subject that has sparked some controversy lately, which I'm amazed by because it shouldn't be controversial unless you're just full of pride and hate being proved wrong, which we all hate being proved wrong. But at the same time, you know what? At this program, we are not afraid. We do not have all the answers. We're not afraid to find out what they are. We are not afraid to change our position if we are proven to be wrong. But when we make claims and we've got just Bible all over the place proving it and people just scream we're wrong, that's just kind of off-putting and not really productive. And so I'm going to give some major proof of a claim that I've been making that Israelites were not necessarily all biological descendants. This is very easy to prove. And I'm going to prove this very clearly from the scriptures. And if you saw a live stream I did a little over a week ago, Jonathan Shelley came on there and he challenged me on this. And, you know, in my humble opinion, I took him to the woodshed on it. Well, what was funny, I saw a clip of him on a podcast that he did right after that, where Pastor Anderson took him to the woodshed. So he had a very rough night. He got taken to the woodshed by me. And then Pastor Anderson took him to the woodshed because of his weird racial views that he has. And so he had a rough day, which resulted in major damage control on Sunday. I mean, major damage control. And I've got to show you just this one clip where he's talking about me because it is fascinating. This guy is the king of doing things that are wrong and sinful and then accusing other people of doing those very things. And it's like, that's kind of what he does. The way he deflects from all of his sin and wickedness is he just preaches sermons about other people doing whatever that sin and that wickedness is. And it's just absolutely ridiculous. So let's watch this clip and I'll comment on it.
Because just a little leaven leavens the whole lump. Why? He partnered with Paul Wittenberger, who has an axe to grind against Pastor Anderson, and he wants to make this weird movie, which he already made. It's called The City Lost. You probably didn't know it came out because no one cares. No one's ever watched it. It's the most boring, stupid film. It's filled with errors and lies. It tries to say that the Temple Mount is not really the Temple Mount. It's something else, and it's this weird conspiracy theory. And it's just not true. It's filled with lies and just nonsense. But of course, when you are hating someone, you believe lies about them. You'll believe heresy. So he gets partnered up with him, and now everything's about the temple. Everything's about this secret hidden location called Temple Zero, which again, nothing in the Bible. You know, we're supposed to walk by faith, not by sight. It's interesting, you've never believed this doctrine until you saw it. You didn't hear it in the Bible. You didn't have faith to believe it in the Bible. You saw something with your eyes, and now that's your whole life's ministry. It's about Job 1 happening in Temple Zero, and everything's about Temple Zero, and now the children of Israel aren't even the children of Israel. Now they're not actually physical descendants anymore. It's just like, what's next?
All right. So listen, if Jonathan Shelley is not a railer, there's no such thing. So first off, the children of Israel are not the children of Israel. Okay, I've never claimed that. Now, here's why he's saying that. He's purposefully misrepresenting because he has a very simple-minded congregation who puts up with all kinds of nonsense, horrible behavior, foul language. The men have been completely emasculated in that church, and they're just now afraid to leave because they'll get railed on too, and they'll lose all their friends. But either way, no, I believe the children of Israel are children of Israel. He is saying that because I believe servants were also included in that, that somehow makes the children of Israel not the children of Israel. Maybe we define it differently. I believe you could be a part of Israel, the children of Israel, and I'm going to prove this to you without being a physical descendant. That's not me saying the children of Israel aren't the children of Israel. That's ridiculous. That's just a lie. Also, he's acting like I'm going down this weird road because of it. Well, wait a minute. The new IFB's always taught how in Esther, many people became Jews. They've brought up those things. They've taught this. What am I doing different? Am I just showing earlier examples of this than you guys? Because I've heard y'all preach that. Or are you saying that there's just that only counts for Jews, not Israelites? And because we understand the difference between the two. So I don't know, is that what you're saying? Because I would say the exact same rules you're using to show where people could become Jews, I would say it was the same rules even before the kingdom split. In fact, I remember Joe Major using that verse in Ezekiel 47, I'm going to go to later. I think it was at the post-trib conference where he preached that same thing, showing that it wasn't strictly a biological thing. He preached that at the post-trib conference in Phoenix, Arizona in 2017. Oh, and he's talking about me and Paul, like we're doing this response to Anderson teaching about the Temple Mount. I've teamed up with Paul, and because we hate Pastor Anderson, we're making this movie about the temple. It's like, but wait a minute. Few things here. In 2018, at the Marching Design Conference that Shelley was a speaker at, me and Joe Major did a presentation on the Temple Mount location showing that it was in the city of David. Went completely unrebuked. Now, I don't remember if Shelley was in the room when that happened, but it went on the internet. It went on the DVDs. Not one person rebuked us, challenged us on those things. In fact, I remember Paul, when I brought that up to him, because he saw me preach a sermon about it, which is why he suggested us doing this at the Marching to Zion conference. But he had asked me, because he didn't want to like cause controversy if it was something that, you know, people didn't agree with in the new IB. And I said, as far as I know, Pastor Anderson agrees with us. And then I sent him the clip where he was talking about the Wailing Wall and how it had nothing to do with the temple. It was a part of the Roman fortress. Jesus said there wouldn't be one stone left upon another. And he saw, I was like, oh, yeah, so Pastor Anderson knows this. So Pastor Anderson used to believe this weird conspiracy theory, but after Paul makes this documentary and after he finds out about the Man of God documentary, now they have to discredit Paul. And so now Anderson has changed his teaching on it. Anderson's the one that changed his teaching. Anderson taught that the Wailing Wall was a part of a Roman fortress and had nothing to do with the temple. He taught that before I ever did. He preached that before Major and I did our thing. I hadn't heard it at the time, but then Major was the one. Pastor Major is the one that brought that whole thing to my mind. So it had nothing to do with hating Pastor Anderson. And by the way, when Paul asked me to be a part of this documentary, it was in early 2020, or actually it was in 2019. We were supposed to go to Israel in early 2020, but remember, COVID happened. And at the time, I was still in fellowship with Anderson. He was still going to his church. But now Shelley's trying to spin it. This is like just this response to Anderson, hate doctrine. We're going down this weird path. Hey, buddy, I was on that path in 2018 and went completely unrebuked. And it was consistent with what Anderson was teaching. He changed. Okay. Shelley is a railer and a liar and about any other negative thing you can think of. And, you know, and people wonder, like, why did you even have him on the program? And again, I refuse to be one of these people who just talk about somebody all the time. And at the same time, I'm afraid to speak to them, especially in a public way. I think that's lame and I think that's cowardly. And if I'm going to talk about these people, you know, I need to be willing to talk to them. And we have done that in more than one case. And I don't mind publicly doing things with these guys as long as we are clearly, it's in something we're in opposition on. Because I would never want anybody to think I'm aligned with these guys or support them in any way. Because even if they hold to verbally to certain doctrines that are correct, their behavior is an abomination. And so I want nothing to do with them. But I don't mind being seen withstanding them, you know, on different things. So, and I know it makes people uncomfortable, but you know, sometimes you got to get uncomfortable in this thing. But in our discussion, Shelley, who is not a very well-read individual, and he's proved that too whenever he's tried talking about the temple, he does roughly know how to use AI. Now, the problem is it's real easy to learn how to use AI. The problem is if you are not aware of a subject, if you're not well-read on something, you're not going to know the right questions to ask. And so as I was giving him proof that it's not all physical descendants, servants would be included, you know, he was demanding I show a commentary, you know, that basically showed how servants were included when talking about the Kohathites. And it's just like, okay, AI is not going to find anything if you're being that specific about one specific instance. You're going to have to broaden things a little bit, but he had no clue how to even ask AI these questions because he's just not familiar with it. He's very good at remembering and repeating things Anderson has preached, but if Anderson's never talked about it, he's never heard of it. And he's definitely not going to be aware of it. And so he often does it. I've never heard that before. Well, that's why all your illustrations you're always given are stuff related to the new IFB, and you got to get out more. And so me, as somebody who I rarely use AI, and I definitely don't use it for my study, I barely ever reference commentaries. I do occasionally, but when I'm able to just show you clear verses like some of the ones I showed him, I don't feel like I need to go to a commentary. It's like, this is what the Bible says right here. So it's pretty obvious. I don't need a commentary for this. But Shelley was insisting I show commentary. And so I'm going to do that. I'm going to use some AI, which is what he demanded. I'm going to use some commentaries, which is what he demanded. And you will see these people are saying exactly what I was claiming on that podcast. And even it's almost like AI has been watching the Spirit of Prophecy podcast. Maybe. I mean, everybody's talking about it. So maybe AI is it's gathering its information from my podcast. I doubt that. But the reason it's coming up with the same thing is because I'm not the first one to teach this stuff. I can't be the first one to teach it. It's just right there in the Bible. If you just have a little bit of common sense, you can see these things. And so let me read some things from AI. I asked AI, Google AI, were the Israelites all biological descendants of Abraham? Let's listen to what they said. According to biblical tradition, the Israelites were considered the biological descendants of Jacob, renamed Israel, who was the grandson of Abraham through Isaac. However, the composition of the ancient Israelite community was not based solely on biblical lineage, assimilation, and mixed heritage. The Hebrew Bible and historical scholarship indicate that non Israelite people, Gentiles, or resident aliens could and did assimilate into the Israelite community. The Israelite population in ancient times included people of mixed heritage, as evidenced by figures like Ruth the Moabitess, who became the great grandmother of King David. Covenantal identity. Some scholars interpret the biblical term sons of Israel as a reference to citizens or members of the Israelite community who adhere to their religious and cultural traditions rather than strictly a biological designation. Identity was based on covenant with God, established through faith and practices like circumcision and not just ancestry. And I'm not even going to read the next part about modern scholarship. It's kind of goofy what they're even trying to prove there, and it's kind of irrelevant to this conversation. But right there, it's showing that there was a process of assimilation that could make somebody an Israelite. And I'm going to show you scripture on that, but also covenantal identity, which is these are the things I have been claiming. It's about being a part of the covenant. God gave Abraham the covenant of circumcision, and Abraham's entire house was circumcised. And that was referring to his servants, all the men who were in his house, and there were many. But back to Google. In summary, while the Israelites traced their foundational ancestry to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in their national narrative, the actual community was composed of individuals who were part of a mixed ethno-religious group, integrating both biological descendants and those who joined the community through faith and assimilation. And so, even amongst Israel, you probably would have had something almost like it's not really a thing in America anymore. I'm sure it is still amongst some communities, but you used to have people who would like brag about their family coming over on the Mayflower. What are they saying? We're the real true Americans because our ancestors came over on the Mayflower. Then you have the Native Americans. Well, we're more American than you because we were already here waiting for your ancestors on the Mayflower. But at the same time, so while there's a truth, those people would definitely be Americans. Well, our Constitution and our form of government also makes it if you're born in the land, you're an American. So, yeah, I'm an American too, but you can see where people might want to claim some kind of special status, based on lineage. But either way, we're all Americans. And so there was certain lineage, there were certain inheritances, and there were certain promises involving certain individuals and tribes and lines and all that kind of stuff. But either way, it was never strictly biological to be of Israel. to be a part of the covenant or the children of Israel or a part of the different tribes. And Shelley was demanding that, like, if somebody is a Kohathite, they had to have physically descended from Kohath, because in his mind, the only legitimate children are biological children. And that's why there's been people, even within the new IFB, who have questioned pastoral qualifications for people because they only had adopted children. But listen, adopted children are your children. They are under your authority. They are a part of your house. They take on your name. They are your children. And as a Christian, you better hope that's true, because we are children of God by adoption. So understand, adoption does make you a part of it. And something else that made you a child and part of somebody's house, you could be bought back then. Okay? And so today, if I were, when we sent out our Christmas cards, it was all biological descendants, with the exception of 2 females that were my son's wives, that were given to them by their fathers in marriage. And they are also a part of the McMurtry clan, I guess you could say, because technically my sons aren't under my authority anymore. They all have their own house, and they are doing their own thing, but we're all still one family. And you know what? And if I had adopted children, they would be in the picture too. And if I ever bought any, they would be in the picture, but I wouldn't be, because I would be in jail, because you're not allowed to buy people in America. But back then you could, and they were a part of your house. So, this is, again, Shelley trying to Americanize the Bible, which is what I've been saying dispensationalists do for a long time. They are applying our modern ways and customs and thinking into the scripture when it was a different part of the world in a different time, and they had different ways of doing things. And understand, people born in somebody's house, and it doesn't even mean under their physical roof, under their authority, were theirs, even if they were not direct physical descendants. We have Bilhah and Zilpah bearing children to Leah and Rachel. In fact, too, you have Ruth the Moabitess, when she has Obed, I believe it was, by Boaz. The baby was actually born to Naomi. So Ruth is the biological mother, but Naomi is the legal mother, you could say. They had those kind of customs back in that day. And so another question I asked AI was, were the servants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob part of Israel? And it says, in the biblical narrative, the servants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob were considered integral members of the patriarchs' households, often sharing in the spiritual and social identity of the emerging nation. While the term Israelite specifically refers to biological descendants of Jacob, renamed Israel, the broader identity of Israel frequently included those who joined through faith, covenant, or household service. Inclusion into the household and covenant. Household members, servants along with their children and grandchildren, were considered part of the patriarch's family or tribe. Covenantal signs. God's covenant with Abraham specifically commanded that every male in his household, including those born in your house or bought with money from any foreigner, be circumcised. Genesis 17, 12, and 13. This act brought them into covenantal community. Google AI has been listening to Spirit of Prophecy podcast. I keep using that example, and they used it too. And I didn't get it from Google AI. And I don't think they're listening to my podcast. It's just right. This is just obvious. Spiritual continuity. The Bible presents Israel as a theological entity rather than just an ethnic one. Those who aligned with the God of Israel through faith or residence, such as the mixed multitude that left Egypt, were integrated into the people of Israel. So right there, and hey, that's just AI. But Shelley is the one that likes AI. So it's like, okay, I'll use AI. I can use it too. And I actually know better what to ask it, because I've actually read on the subject, where he is not. He is not well read at all. He is only well listened to one source, mainly of Anderson. And so if Anderson hasn't preached on it, then that teaching just does not exist in his mind. I need to turn the notifications off of my phone so it stops making noise. But let's go ahead and let's look at some commentaries, because he wanted commentaries. Now, he wanted me to show a commentary about the specific verse on the Kohathites, showing that it included servants. He demanded I do that, which is dumb, and it's ignorant to even put that expectation there. My claim is that being a whateverite, Israelite, Levite, whatever, it's not strictly biological. That's the claim I've been making. And so if I can prove that that is the case, that you can be an ite of one of these people without being a physical descendant, then that very well, it is okay to assume that about the Kohathites. And I don't have to show you a verse where it specifically says the Kohathites had included servants. I just have to show you that this is a practice that they had and did. And then it's a very safe assumption that servants would be included, because while Shelley doesn't see them as legit, okay, everyone else did. The Bible does. They were a part of their household. And so he can try to apply his modern American way of accounting for things onto the scriptures. The scripture is not going to magically change meaning for him just because he yells something really loud. Okay, even if he can get the new IB to back him up on this, it's not going to change reality. So let's look at Gill. Okay, Gill is often, when I do debates, again, I don't use commentaries very often. I occasionally refer to them if I really get stumped on something. Okay, I do use them sometimes, but most of the time, if I can just see something clearly in the scriptures, I don't need a commentary. But what happens in debates, I will show people things in the scriptures, and people just never concede they're wrong in debates. They don't have the humility for that. So what they do is they start demanding you use these other sources. And it's like, well, I don't have them prepared. I've not even looked into this. But then I always have people sending me examples after that. And whenever this comes up, and it often does, because I don't think I need commentaries if I can show clear scripture, but people will send it to me after, I challenged them. He referenced me making it my life's mission to make sure everybody understands that the sons of God presenting themselves before the Lord on earth and not in heaven. Okay. Huge exaggeration there. Okay. It's not my life's mission. I believe that, I have way more biblical reason or precedent for that position than the idea that they're in heaven presenting themselves before the Lord. Nobody understands what that is. But either way, they were like acting like I was the only one that ever came up with that. Multiple people sent me John Gill's commentary. So John Gill, I kind of like him because usually when I read his stuff, he agrees with me. But I'm sure there's plenty of things we disagree on. But I looked him up. He's usually one of the first ones I'll look up. So I went to Deuteronomy chapter 23. Okay, now, before we go to Deuteronomy chapter 23, let me read it to you, and I will tell you what I immediately thought when I looked at these passages. I mean, what just immediately came to my mind from the plain, simple reading of the scriptures. And then we will see if any commentators agree with me, and make sure I'm just not going down some weird road because I just can't stand the new IIV or whatever. But which is the accusation that keeps getting thrown my way. So Deuteronomy 23 says, "He that is wounded in the stones or hath his privy member cut off shall not enter into the congregation of the Lord. A bastard shall not enter into the congregation of the Lord. Even to his 10th generation shall he not enter into the congregation of the Lord. An Ammonite or a Moabite shall not enter into the congregation of the Lord. Even to their 10th generation shall they not enter into the congregation of the Lord forever, because they met you not with bread, with water in the way, when you came forth out of Egypt, and because they hired against thee Balaam, the son of Beor, of Pethor, of Mesopotamia, to curse thee." So there's two ways you can look at that. Okay. If you wanted to do the strict literal reading of it, if you were a Moabite and you were dwelling in the land and you wanted to become a part of them as a people, you could live amongst them, but you would not be allowed into the congregation, and neither would your son or your grandson, and so on until the 10th generation. Now, I'm not going to read all of it, but the commentators I did look up, they basically said that just meant forever, and which it does seem to imply that in Deuteronomy 23. I mean, who's going to keep track of all that? But yeah, that was basically when it says even to the 10th generation, even 10 generations later, they're not allowed in. That was because there was a great curse that was put on them. So that's what the commentaries say about that. Okay, and if people want to disagree on that and say nope, they could have kept track 10 generations. Also, it didn't count for Ruth because, again, women, they were under the authority of the household that they were a part of. And so understand that Ruth, while she was from Moab, when she became it was Mahlon and Chilion, I forgot which one was her husband, she would have become a part of Israel because she was given to them. She's under their authority. Later, she's given to Boaz, but she would have been an Israelite because she would have been under their authority. So, well, what about men? Again, well, with men, we can see there was a process of assimilation. And I don't know for sure what it was for all of the strangers. I'll show you one verse in a little bit that makes it seem like their sons that were born in the land would immediately be a part. But here in Deuteronomy 23, which is where we're going to look at some commentaries, notice what it says in verse 30 or verse 7: Thou shalt not abhor an Edomite, for he is thy brother. Thou shalt not abhor an Egyptian, because thou wast a stranger in his land. The children that are begotten of them shall enter into the congregation of the Lord in their third generation. So notice what it's talking about right there. That was their way. That was assimilation there. If the people wanted to be a part of them as a people, it was like a way they would test them out. And so it's like, okay, well, you're not going to be able to, but your children won't be able to. But if by the time your grandchildren come, if you for that amount of time have been, serving the Lord, you haven't been bringing in other gods and committing abominations, then you will be just like one of us. That's what we're seeing here, that process of assimilation that excluded the Ammonites and Moabites, and it gave specifics for the Egyptians and the Edomites, who were both people that Israel had problems with. So it is very possible that to the third generation, it was only for the Egyptians and the Edomites, but anybody else, it wouldn't be like you could just move into the land. But if you were a stranger in that land, your children could, because it says in Ezekiel 47:21, so shall ye divide this land unto you according to the tribes of Israel. And it shall come to pass that ye shall divide it by lot for an inheritance unto you and to the strangers that sojourn among you, which shall beget children among you. And they shall be unto you as born in the country among the children of Israel. They shall have inheritance with you among the tribes of Israel. And it shall come to pass that in what tribe the stranger sojourneth, there shall ye give him his inheritance, saith the Lord God. So right there we see they not only with them assimilating, they would even become a part of a tribe, a stranger sojourning, if they had children born in the land. And we have, even in our country today, if you have somebody who is not an American, not a legal resident, if their children are born here, their children are residents, and are Americans. And that can often help the parents become citizens. Obviously, it's not exactly like it is in the Bible, but they did. They had a method back then, a process of assimilation, and that's what we're seeing in Deuteronomy chapter 23. And so the way I am interpreting that is that what we're seeing there is how people who were not physically born in the land, how they could become a part of Israel and one of the tribes. And so let's look at John Gill's commentary on Deuteronomy 23:8. It says, the children that are begotten of them, of such as became proselytes, shall enter into the congregation of the Lord in their third generation. Not in the third generation from the time this law was made, but from the time that any of them should embrace the true religion. Their sons were the second generation, and their grandchildren the third. And such might be admitted into the congregation and be reckoned as of them, both in their civil and church state, and be capable of serving even offices among them, and of marriage with them, as the Targum of Jonathan, which some of the Jews interpret of males only, for females, according to them, might be married immediately as soon as made proselytes, in which way they account for the lawfulness of Solomon's marriage of Pharaoh's daughter. So that's what Gill said about it, showing this is assimilation. How if they converted, that eventually their grandchildren would become a part of the nation. Matthew Henry, same thing. The Edomites and Egyptians had not so deep a mark of displeasure put upon them as the Moabites and Ammonites had. If an Edomite or Egyptian turned proselyte, his grandchildren should be looked upon as members of the congregation of the Lord to all intents and purposes. We should think that the Edomites had been more injurious to the Israelites than the Ammonites and deserved as little favor from them. And yet, Thou shalt not abhor an Edomite, as thou must an Ammonite, for he is thy brother. Note the unkindness and near relations, through though by many worse taken, yet should with us, for that reason, because of this relation, be first forgiven. And then as to the Egyptians, here is a strange reason given why they must not be abhorred. Thou wast a stranger in their land, and therefore, though hardly used there to be civil to them, for old acquaintance sake, they must not remember their bondage in Egypt for keeping up of any ill will to the Egyptians, but only for magnifying God's power and goodness and their deliverance. So right there, you have a couple commentaries, again, showing how people of other nations, strangers, could become a part of the children of Israel. And so just to try to keep this from going long, I have some unclear examples, which I'm not going to take the time to do, but I'm going to give one clear example. I'm going to give the unclear one too, just because I think it's interesting. So, because when it comes to this assimilation too, while the Bible is very clear, they had a process of assimilation. With every individual that we read about in the Old Testament, it does not give us the details or explain to us where these people were in that assimilation. But we do have many examples of servants, mighty men, of David's, of Saul's, that were, Canaanites. You have Uriah the Hittite. You have Doeg the Edomite. We've got all these people among Israel that were not Israelites, but yet they almost seemed as one of them in many ways. And the fact that they're referred to as Hittites or whatever, you say, well, that's proof that they were never actually an Israelite. But wait, maybe they were the first generation. As they would take captives in these areas, they would have people who would convert. As they would go and conquer these people, they'd take some of the servants, and they would have, and they could have been in a process of assimilation, because with Uriah the Hittite, for example, I mean, he definitely seemed like a man of integrity, of character. I would think it's safe to say he had probably he had converted. He was married to Bathsheba, who was related, I forgot how exactly, to one of David's advisors. And so, there a lot of these people that we see around David, there you see kind of a mixing between people who were Jews and who weren't Jews, because I think many of these people were assimilating into the culture. So that would explain why we see these people mentioned. And while the Bible does not specifically tell us when they assimilated, what tribe they assimilated to in all these cases, when I read about them, it doesn't throw me off thinking, wow, these people seem like they're a part of Israel, but they're clearly not physically from Israel. I would just assume they are converts that are in the process of assimilating into the culture. But let me give you an example of somebody who was not an Israelite and became a Levite. Hey, Shelly, will that help you? Will you admit you were wrong if I show you somebody who is not a Levite, who is not an Israelite, and who became a Levite? Because I'm going to show you an example of that. But let me show you this one unique case first, just to leave everybody hanging a little bit, because I do think this was the common practice, that if you conquered a people, if they were living among you, if they so chose, they could convert, become proselytes, and be a people. But I think we have an interesting possible exception here with a group called the Gibeonites that I find fascinating, because in Joshua 9:20, that's a story where these men, they pretended they come from a far place. They had the moldy bread. They wore old, dirty clothes. So they would get Israel to make a covenant with them so they wouldn't kill them. And they deceived them. And in Joshua 9:20, it says, this we will do to them. We will even let them live, lest wrath be upon us, because of the oath which we swear unto them. And so basically they put a curse on them and telling them, you can live, but you are going to be servants. You're going to be hewers of wood and drawers of water unto all the congregation. And so in verse 23, it says, now therefore ye are cursed, and there shall none of you be freed from being bondmen and hewers of wood and drawers of water for the house of my God. So these people were basically, banished to being servants forever, servants for the house of God. And so because of this curse, they were not able to fully assimilate. It would appear. And so, but what's interesting, in Nehemiah chapter 7, as they are coming back from the captivity, the Gibeonites are mentioned among them. It says in Nehemiah 7:5, and my God put it into their heart to gather together the nobles and the rulers and the people, that they might be reckoned by genealogy. And I found a register of the genealogy of them, which came up at the first, and found written therein, these are the children of the province that went up out of the captivity of those who had been carried away, whom Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, had carried away, and came to Jerusalem and Judah, everyone to a city, and who came with Zerubbabel, Joshua, Nehemiah, Azariah, Rehemiah, Nehemiah, Mordecai, Bilshan, Mispereth, Bigvai, Nahum, Baanah. The number, I say, of the men of the people of Israel was this. Notice that. The number of the men of the people of Israel, and it's going through all these names and saying how many there were. People who are able to reckon their genealogies. Interestingly enough, verse 25, the children of Gibeon, 90 and 5. So they're still called the children of Gibeon. And I think it's safe to say that the curse still stood, that they were still servants. They were still considered Gibeonites. They were not, it does not appear they were called Levites, even though they're being named with a bunch of Levites in here. But they were numbered with the children of Israel. And so I think the fact they're still called Gibeon is because they were kind of an exception because of that curse that was put on them. But they were still included as the people of Israel, even though Gibeonites originally were not of Israel. And so, and what's interesting in Nehemiah 7:63, it mentions a group of people. I'm not going to read all the names because I'll butcher them. But in verse 64, these sought their register among those that were reckoned by genealogy, but it was not found. Therefore, were they as polluted put from the priesthood. And so there was one group that got shut out because they couldn't prove their lineage. Where the Gibeonites, they were actually able to and got numbered with them. They were numbered with the people, the men of Israel. So I just think that's interesting. So where with the Gibeonites, who were a cursed people, who had a special curse put on them, even they were numbered with Israel. I think that's interesting. But I don't see them being called Levites, even though they would have worked very much with the Levites. They probably always just would have been doing the menial tasks, because of that curse that was on them, which, by the way, I think would be better for them than most other people. But, they shouldn't have done it in this sneaky way, because I'm going to show you another example of someone else who I think it's very clear why he got interested in the house of the Lord, and he became a servant in the house of the Lord, and he became a Levite, and he wasn't a descendant. Shelley, he wasn't a descendant. You know who this guy was? I've preached whole sermons about him. I don't know why I didn't immediately think of this guy when it came up. It was, in fact, it was either a commentary or AI who mentioned this guy as an example. And I'm like, how did I not think of him? I preached whole sermons about this guy. I preached a sermon about this guy back when I was at Lighthouse, like 15 years ago. But in 2 Samuel 6:9, says, and David was afraid of the Lord that day, and he said, how shall the ark of the Lord come to me? Remember when Uzzah touched the ark and he died as they were carrying it? So David would not remove the ark of the Lord unto the city of David, but carried it aside into the house of Obed-Edom the Gittite. And the ark of the Lord continued in the house of Obed-Edom the Gittite 3 months, and the Lord blessed Obed-Edom and all his household. And this has always just been a fascinating story to me. I remember my dad telling me this story when I was a kid, and I remember telling Dad, I was like, I wouldn't have let him take the ark out of my house. And my dad was like, well, they had to. It belonged to Israel, and David was the king. And I just always felt sorry for Obed-Edom when I would read that story. He's getting all these blessings because the Ark of the Covenant's at his house, and then here they come and they take it away. And I used to feel sorry for Obed-Edom. Well, one day I just was reading and I started noticing, hey, wait a minute, he's being mentioned again. I did a word search on Obed-Edom, started reading all the references to him, and this is fascinating because this guy who had the presence of the Ark of the Covenant that represented the presence of God in his house and was blessed, after the ark was taken out of his house, he followed the ark. And notice what it says in 2 Samuel 21:19. Because first off, Obed-Edom was a Gittite. Okay? Now, in case you don't know what a Gittite is, can anybody think of a really famous Gittite? He was a real bad guy. And he's mentioned in 2 Samuel 21:19. I'm not going to read it. Goliath the Gittite. A Gittite was somebody from Gath. So Obed-Edom is a Gittite. Okay? These are not people of Israel. These are a bad people. But Obed-Edom, he is a Gittite. And so surely this guy can't become a part of Israel. Well, yeah, he can. And so let's see what happens. In 1 Chronicles 15:17 says, so the Levites appointed Heman, the son of Joel, and of his brethren, Asaph, the son of Berechiah, the son of Merari, their children, Ethan, the son of Cushahiah. These are all Levites, by the way. And with them their brethren of the second degree, Zechariah, Ben, and Jeziel, Shemiramoth, whole bunch of names. And then you'll notice towards the end, Obed-Edom and Jael, the porters. And then it mentions singers. Heman, Asaph, Ethan were appointed to sound with cymbals of brass, and Zechariah, and Aziel, Shemiramoth, Jehiel, Unai, and Eliab, and Maaseiah, Benaiah with psalteries on Alamoth, and Mattaniah, and Elephalah, Mechniah, and Obed-Edom, and Jael, and Azaziah with harps on the Sheminith to excel. Okay, and listen, don't try to tell me this is a different Obed-Edom. I mean, that name Obed-Edom, it means servant of Edom. Okay, what person from Israel is going to name their child servant of Edom? Okay? That doesn't make a whole lot of sense. No, it's the same guy. And where is he? He is at the house of the Lord by the ark. Verse 24. And Shebaniah and Jehoshaphat, Nethaniel and Amasaiah, and Zechariah and Benaiah and Eleazar the priest did blow with the trumpets before the ark of God, and Obed-Edom and Jehiah were doorkeepers for the ark. So David and the elders of Israel and the captains over thousands went to bring up the ark of the covenant of the Lord out of the house of Obed-Edom with joy. Notice he is a doorkeeper. It's like, you know what? If I can't have the ark of the covenant in my house, I'm going to go to its house, and I'm going to get as close to it as I can. And he was a porter. He was a musician. He served the house of God, which was the job of the Levites. And he is going to be named with the Levites, even though he's a Gittite. Physically, he's a Gittite. Okay, Shelley, physically, he's a Gittite. But he is a legitimate child of Israel. He is a legitimate Levite because it's not a biological thing. It's not strictly biological. It's an authority thing. It's a covenant thing. And notice in 1 Chronicles 16:4, and he appointed certain of the Levites to minister before the ark of the Lord. Obed-Edom's always around the ark of the Lord. And notice they appointed certain of the Levites, and to record and to thank and praise the Lord God of Israel. And he names these Levites. Asaph the chief. Next to him, Zechariah, Jael, Shemiramoth, Jehiel, Mattaniah, Eliab, Benaiah, and Obed-Edom. Obed-Edom was a Levite. How? He assimilated into the tribes. He became a part of Israel. He was a convert. Somehow, after he got all those blessings with the Ark of the Covenant being in his house, he didn't fight them taking it out of his house. It didn't belong to him. But he not only kept himself near the Ark of the Lord, he kept his family before the ark, around the Ark of the Lord. 1 Chronicles 16:37. So he left there before the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord, Asaph and his brethren, to minister before the ark continually as every day's work required. And Obed-Edom with their brethren, 68. Obed-Edom, also the son of Jeduthun and Hosah, the porters. You can't get Obed-Edom away from the Ark of the Covenant. 1 Chronicles 26:4. Moreover, the sons of Obed-Edom, it goes and names his son, and it gets to Peluthai, the 8th, for God blessed him. God kept blessing Obed-Edom even after the ark left his house, because you know what? Obed-Edom didn't leave the ark. He wanted to get as close as he could to the things of God, and it goes off naming sons, grandsons. These are the sons of Obed-Edom. They and their sons and their brethren, able men for strength for the service, were 62 of Obed-Edom. Obed-Edom and his family were Levites. He originally was a Gittite. That's what he was physically. In fact, even as a Gittite, maybe he was a servant of theirs. Maybe he was taken captive and was one of theirs, and then Israel got him. Either way, it doesn't matter. It was never just a biology thing. That is a modern thinking that has come in just the last 100 years or so, because, again, Zionism, they want to take that land over from the people that have been living there for years. They say it belongs to an ethnic group, and they're going to fight to the death for those things. And Christians have gone along with it. And even though guys like Shelley are against Zionism, he has still got a lot of dispensational baggage that he's carrying over with him in thinking that it was strictly about genealogies and things. And I just think it's hilarious because he's trying to find people to help him find proof that the children of Israel were all physical descendants, and it's not going well. You know why? Because it's just not the case, right? Shelley, I get it. Listen, sometimes there's just things we're not aware of. There's also we all have subjects we are ignorant about, and it's not my fault. Anderson hasn't preached on this apparently. That's why you don't know about it. But just because you don't know about it doesn't mean it hasn't been being taught. I showed you very old commentaries showing how other people could assimilate. You demanded I show commentaries. Yes, you demanded specifically about that one verse on Kohath. That was a ridiculous request. It showed your ignorance and even asking that. What you were wanting to find out, I just displayed through Matthew Henry, John Gill, and through AI, which these things don't really matter to me because I showed you in the scriptures. I did that when you're on the program. That's enough. But here we did all three. We did what matters to you and we did what matters to me. And so the children of Israel, it was not strictly an ethnic thing, a biological thing. That was never the case. It was a legal thing. It was about household. And Abraham had a very large household, but he didn't have many that were a part of his house that physically came from him. He only had Ishmael was the first one, then Isaac, and then later the sons of Keturah. But he had many in his house. He was a very great man with great wealth, many servants, and he passed that to Isaac. Isaac passed it to Jacob, and those guys, Isaac multiplied servants himself because God blessed him. Jacob multiplied servants himself because God blessed him. And they didn't just abandon all those people. I didn't even go to all the scriptures. I mean, Shelley, if I'm kind of tired of even addressing your nonsense because it shows just total ignorance. But let me just say this. I'm not going to bore everybody with this. But if you just go to Genesis and search men servants, maid servants, things like that, almost every story that we see of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, you see servants mentioned with them. Even when Abraham's servant went to find a wife for Isaac, it's like Shelley has like this cartoonish image of these stories in the Bible. Like if you watch cartoons, it seems like it's just Abraham, Sarah, kind of all by themselves living in a tent somewhere. Well, Abraham had 318 fighting servants just for fighting. And so without a doubt, there would have been more than 1,000 in Abraham's house. Okay. And when I say house, I don't mean the physical building that he lived in a tent, but that means under his authority. And he sent Eliezer, and Shelley's got this cartoonist image, almost like it's just Eliezer going by himself out there. No, that was not the case. In fact, when Eliezer went out to go get Rebekah, he didn't come back just Eliezer and Rebekah. In fact, in Genesis 24:58, it says, and they called Rebekah and said unto her, wilt thou go with this man? She said, I will go. And they sent away Rebekah, their sister, and her nurse, and Abraham's servant, and his men. So even Abraham's servant had men with him because, it was probably Eliezer, doesn't name him in this story, but he was like very high ranking in Abraham's house. And he would have had people that followed his men under his command. And so they blessed Rebekah. And they gave her this blessing, sent her out, and Rebekah arose and her damsels. And they rode upon the camels and followed the man. When Abraham's servant came home with Rebekah, there were many people with him. There was Eliezer, there was his men that were with him, there was Rebekah, there was her nurse, there was her damsels. It's like that in every story. Even in the story too, he was talking like Jacob just went all by himself to Laban, which I think is a stretch. Now, I will say, I don't see where it mentions Jacob's servants going with him. It does not mention that. But considering the fact that you see, even in the story of Abraham and when he went to sacrifice Isaac, you see servants referenced there that were with him. But it's almost a leap to think he wouldn't have had any of his servants with him. But let me just say this, while the Bible does not say one way or the other, it does tell us while he was there with Laban. And as his flocks are multiplying and he's increasing, it says in verse 43 of chapter 30, and the man increased exceedingly and had much cattle and maidservants and men servants. And in chapter 32, when he leaves, and Jacob sent messengers before him to Esau his brother, and in the land of Seir, the country of Edom. And he commanded them, saying, thus shall you speak unto my lord Esau. Thy servant Jacob saith thus, I have sojourned with Laban, and have stayed there until now, and I have oxen and asses and flocks and men servants and women servants, and I have sent to tell my lord that I might find grace in thy sight. So Jacob had a bunch of servants with him. And you know what? Esau had 400 men with him. These were great men. This was the life of the rich back in those days. They had many people who served them. There were not just employees that could just put in their 2 weeks notice and things like that. No, they were a part of their house. They lived with them, and they were like family in many ways. And does anybody think that when, we see all these stories about the people of the land fearing, Jacob and his sons and all that, because they were intimidating. You know why? Because it wasn't just Jacob and 12 sons. It was probably thousands of people. And so that would have scared them, seeing this large group of people. And does anybody think they just abandoned those people when the famine came? Hey, all right, servants, we're leaving you behind. We're shutting down the factory. Good luck. Go find new homes. Your tents are all ours. Or maybe they gave them a severance package. No, they would have went with them. Why? Because they were part of their house. They were like family. And that's just how things were back then. And if you think that it was just the people who came out of the loins of Jacob, then that's a huge stretch, because we see these people with them everywhere in the scriptures. And it's all over the pages of scripture. And people don't understand. In the new IFB, it's just mainly about physical children. And yes, they are a part of your house. There's no doubt about that. But so are adopted ones. Okay? And back then, those bought with money. And the law even talks about that. Those bought with money, they're to be circumcised. That they are a part of your house. They are under your authority. They are Israelites. If you are a servant of Levi, you're from the house of Levi. You are a Levite in that case. And throughout time, as they divided all of Israel into 12 tribes, people were able to become a part of Israel and even become a part of one of the tribes. And just because Jonathan Shelley's never heard of it doesn't mean it's not clearly taught in the scriptures. It is clearly taught by me. It is clearly taught by AI, and it is clearly taught in commentaries. It apparently hasn't been taught by Anderson. Therefore, it does not exist in the mind of Anderson's greatest copycat. So anyway, I hope you all enjoyed that. And what's so fascinating about this is a man like Shelley, he cannot take correction. There's just too much pride. And as a result, he will double down. He will rail. He will find something I said and try to apply some crazy meaning to it and call me a railer. Or maybe he'll just start attacking somebody else to distract from his nonsense. But either way, we proved our point. And the children of Israel were all legitimate children of Israel, but they weren't all necessarily biological descendants. You don't have to be a biological descendant of Jacob to be a part of these covenant people of Israel. And I gave you clear examples, a great example with Obed-Edom, who became a Levite. So, case closed. Thank you all for watching this. God bless. I look forward to seeing more damage control from these people. So God bless you. We'll see y'all next time.